What's up, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Falcons Final Whistle podcast presented by Zaxby's, recorded on video here in the Ticketmaster studios, which is somewhat unusual because normally I'm Scott, that's Terrin, that's Tori, and normally we do this audio only right after a game, but there was a very long flight home from Arizona that didn't end until about 1:30 in the morning on Sunday night. So we're doing this
Monday morning.
And if you occasionally hear some buzzing, it's because the Falcons IBM Performance Field facility is getting some upgrades, and some upgrades involve some construction noise. So hopefully the guys outside can just take a chill pill for a second, but I don't anticipate it.
No. It's not my stomach rumbling anymore.
So the Falcons lost to the Arizona Cardinals 25-23 at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but since we're heading into a Week 11 bye, we're going to big picture it a little bit as we go through the course of this pod and kind of give a state of the Falcons. They are 4-6. I don't think that's where they wanted to be at this point. All three of us were in the locker room Sunday night. The frustration was palatable with the way that the guys were talking, but there does seem to be some that they're also resolute in the fact that, like, hey, we're better than this. Yeah. But they also know that they have to get it turned around fast.
Mm-hmm. I think when you look at the conversations that were had in the locker room, and it's like, we're frustrated, and then it's like, okay, what do you do with this frustration? Because there's been frustration now for a few weeks because the Falcons have lost 4 of their last 5. They've lost to teams that, when we were looking at this schedule, going into this 5 stretch of games with the Commanders, the Texans, the Titans, the Vikings, the Cardinals, you looked at that 5 slate of games in May when we get the schedule, and it's like, all right, that's a pretty good slate of games for you to potentially go on a run here, because you would think on paper that this team is pretty dang good and with the talent that they've accumulated. And I think that's what's so frustrating, is that the potential of what we were advertised this team to be in training camp has had moments of seeing that potential, but you gotta win games in order for that potential to actually be met. And so I think frustrated is the right word for it. That's the word that everybody used in the locker room, whether it was Arthur Smith or Drake London, whoever. And I think that it's what you can do with that frustration. Because otherwise it's like, okay, you're frustrated. Cool.
Well, it's like the saying goes, actions speak louder than words.
Right.
No matter how many times you say you're frustrated, who cares if you keep losing? That frustration's going to build, but if you don't change the tide to the other direction, it's like, okay, say it as many times as you want. I'm going to stop believing you.
Right. And, the words that also kept coming up, and this wasn't even just on Sunday night after the loss, but this was going into the Week 10 prep, was that Arthur Smith was saying, we're going to reassess, reevaluate, regroup in the bye. Do it. Mm-hmm. Like, just do that. Figure out what needs to be fixed and fix it. And I think, like, even he said, this was last Friday, and he was like, you have to be critical, because if you're not critical, you're not going to grow.
Right.
Be as critical as you can be, because this thing, I think going in 2 games below 500 is not where this team thought it would be or wants to be.
Or should be.
And
I think that Arthur Smith talks so much and prides himself on being objective and at times brutally honest about the state of his offense or his defense or his players, right? That we're kind of taking, as you're catching, we're kind of taking a page from that, right? Is that we're going to try to be objective and take a look at it, because I think I've covered some really bad teams. Mm-hmm. I've covered a team that started 0-10.
Right.
And at some point, it's less about being frustrated and more about accepting where that team is at and where that team's talent level is. And that's not this situation.
Right. That's the last 2 years.
Right. That's
Atlanta.
not this.
Yeah.
This is, you look at this defense, you look at the skill players, you look at the investment to the offensive line, and you think, this team has potential for better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what spikes the frustration a little bit, especially when you lose to teams that you figure that you could make hay against. So when I kind of look at it, and you look at look, every game is its own story. Every play is its own story. But you can look at overarching themes. And the one thing that kind of keeps coming up is inconsistent quarterback play. We're going to get to that. But explosive plays allowed is something that this defense has been good. The pass rush has been pretty steady, although they would like to get the quarterback down more often. But we saw Trey McBride,
Yes.
right, have a huge day. We saw
He knew he was on fire too because
Yeah, did y'all hear him in the
Ooh.
post game? Yeah.
he was dropping some shade on Richie Grant.
Yeah.
He was like, I was killing him. I asked Kyler for that ball because I knew I was beating him in man-to-man each time. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just been an issue where it's like one little breakdown here and there
Right.
can kind of change the tide. And you look back at the Vikings game, you think,
Well, that's the thing is like this hasn't been a new issue.
Right.
It's not like all of a sudden in the last 3 games this defense has given up explosives. We were actually just talking about this. This has been something that has kind of chipped away over the course of this entire season. But against, Detroit, where you have Sam Laporta leaking out for a touchdown, and then there was Calvin Ridley against the Jaguars in London, and Mike Evans in Tampa Bay. It's like these are kind of one-off situations. But it's gotten to the point now in the last 3 games where it's accumulated. And that's where I think a major issue lies.
And I asked Caden Ellis about that in the locker room because it's like, yes, at the beginning, those were one-off instances. You can shake them off.
Right.
It was a fluke. It happens. As he said, everybody gets paid in this league. Everyone is great.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can get got at any point in time.
You got.
You got.
But I said, how do you balance brushing it off as a fluke or getting got and also it becoming a trend?
Right.
And that's the thing, because if they realize it's working, they're going to do it again. Mm-hmm. And so that's when the play happens. You finish the drive, you let it go in the moment. But when you get to the sideline, you immediately have to figure out how to fix it. They got the iPads, they got the tablets or whatever bougie, expensive device
Microsoft
that plays.
Microsoft
Yeah,
Surface.
sorry.
But no, yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing is Trey McBride had 131 receiving yards, and how many of them were over 16 yards a pop?
He
A
had,
lot.
I think, 66 yards in the first half and then 69 in the second half.
Yeah.
So they didn't fix that.
Right.
yeah. So I think as we kind of continue to evaluate here and focus in on areas that are question marks or areas that have to get addressed, Arthur Smith has made it very clear that he's going to address the quarterback situation. Mm-hmm. Taylor Heineke had been playing from the second half of week 8 against Tennessee all the way through the third or fourth quarter of Sunday's game against
Up to the fourth quarter.
Arizona. When he was trying to extend a play, he did a good job of it and suffered a hamstring injury that didn't allow him to return. We saw Desmond come back, fall short on a 4th down, and then in a do or die, he found a way to drive the ball down.
That's the most successful play for the Falcons in the red zone. If you don't believe me, go look at Friday's Falcons Daily.
Yeah, and so he scores the go-ahead drive that doesn't stand. And Arthur Smith was asked after the game, how did what played out on Sunday, is it going to impact? That's what he was asked.
Yeah,
right?
and he said definitely.
And he said
How could it
definitely.
not?
Right. So then you have to you can look at numbers. Taylor Heineke had 55 passing yards, but also with the understanding that the game plan was to run the ball and run the ball a lot. They ran the ball 41 times.
Yeah.
So, and they ran the ball effectively. Bijan Robinson had 95 yards on a career high 22 carries. 22 carries, so they were able to move the football.
Right.
That's never been a problem. But when you look at this quarterback situation, what plays, and this is just us talking here, what plays a role to us,
Yeah.
to you?
Yeah.
We're not taking callers?
When this just call in Peyton Victoria from Smyrna.
Right, yeah. Now everyone knows my full name. My government name.
Keep mine quiet.
Right, yeah. So Arthur has said for the last 2 weeks that, okay, we're not going to play musical chairs with the quarterback. We're going to reevaluate, reassess, and regroup after the bye week. I'm using his words again. But that a whole big construct of that is around the quarterback. And it's who's going to be the starting quarterback after the bye, because it's not going to be a week in, week out. Oh, it's going to be Taylor Heineke this week. Oh, it's going to be Desmond Ridder this week. That's not what's going to happen. Whoever Arthur Smith, I think, names as the starter going into the game against the Saints in week 12 will start the rest of the season, barring injury, of course. or anything crazy.
What if it falls apart?
Then you cross that bridge when you get to it. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. All I can tell you is that is what he has said to this point. Do you stick with Desmond Ridder and just kind of be like, look, the issues for him, it wasn't that he wasn't moving the ball. I think it was the fact that he wasn't taking care of the ball in really key situations. And it's like, okay, has he learned a lesson in the last 2 weeks by Taylor Heineke going out there? And it's like, okay, what does Taylor Heineke provide you? When Arthur Smith says there's a lot of variables that go into this decision, he's right. I wish he would be a little bit more forthcoming on what those variables are so that I can better explain it to viewers and readers and everybody like that. But you also got to take into account that Taylor Heineke is hurt. He hurt his hamstring. He was ruled out of the game. That's why Desmond Ridder came in. And I don't know where this thing goes. But to me, I say all of this to say, at this point, when it comes to this team, I feel like the conversation in Atlanta has evolved beyond the quarterback. To me, Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke, figure out who you want to play the rest of the season, play them, see what happens. But this is a situation this is only in the short term. I feel like this quarterback conversation, there's so many more conversations to be had. Through the spring, through the off season. This is something that we're going to be talking about for a while. And the thing is like, regardless of the way you look at it, I feel like the issues that this offense has displayed through 10 games, whether it's Taylor Heineke in the game or Desmond Ridder, there are overlapping inconsistencies in the offense regardless of who's at the quarterback position.
Do you think the debate surrounding the quarterback situation is kind of bleeding into other assets of the game?
Yeah, Drake London was asked about that on Sunday night, and he didn't seem to think that using multiple quarterbacks at points during the season or having new guys come in the second half had an effect on the passing game. He was pretty adamant about that, and he's obviously great friends with Drake London. Drake London.
Jake London is great friends with Drake London.
Yeah.
Knock.
I hope so.
Self-love.
And Taylor Heineke has always been well liked in every locker room that he's ever been in. So they didn't say that was the issue. One programming note that I'll just try to cover for us here is this podcast is being recorded at 10:30 in the morning on a Monday. Arthur Smith speaks at 1 p.m. I don't anticipate him naming a starting quarterback, but if you happen to be hearing this after Monday at 1, and Arthur does announce a quarterback, that's why we're discussing it in this conceptual way. Again, I'm not certain that's going to happen, but let's just get that out.
So we wouldn't come back up for emergency pod.
I'm not sure if our producers would love that.
But I will say this. I'll add on to this because I think this is important to your question, is that I was recently interviewing Terrence Mathis, who was on that 1998 team for the Falcons.
I thought you were going to say my name.
And and we were talking to him about this whole quarterback change situation. He's someone who I believe, and I hope this is right, but he played 13 seasons and I think had 16 different quarterbacks, or it was switched or something like that. He played with a lot of different quarterbacks, and we were talking to him and asking him about what it's like to experience an in-season change at quarterback. And he said it's kind of like it does have an effect on everybody outside of the two people who are in this conversation, because you think about it, for so long, someone like Drake London was like, Dez is my guy, Dez is my guy, Dez is my guy. I'm working with Dez. I'm getting boom, boom, boom. We're filling things out. We're in a good cadence. We're in a good rhythm. And then Dez is no longer the quarterback. And it's like, now you have to mentally switch past to be like, okay, Taylor Heineke is my guy. I have to get in rhythm with him. What are we doing? How are we doing this? How does he operate? And these are two different people who have different strengths and weaknesses. And it's like, people can say that there's no effect on that, but that's why you don't see offensive coordinators or head coaches or whoever wanting to make it a week-by-week thing, a series-by-series things with the quarterback, because rhythm is important.
Here's my counter, though, is that new guy comes in, and then they score 48 points in 6 quarters, and then they put another, 15, 14 on top of that. So Taylor was able to move the ball and score.
But how many of those are from Younghoe Koo? How many touchdowns are we scoring in comparison to field goals? That's my counter to that.
Very skewed.
Right? Like, how they're not getting in the end zone. So
Well, and when you also think about it, Scotty Miller has had 2 touchdowns this season from Taylor Heineke.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know that you would necessarily have expected that if Desmond Ridder was the quarterback, because Scotty.
I don't know about that. Because, no, because I think it's all about the play call, and I think we're kind of getting into the nuances of it. I don't think there's anything to be like, oh, Taylor Heineke and Scotty Miller have this great connection, and that's why he scored 2 touchdowns.
That might be who he practiced with more often before he became the starter.
Yeah.
We don't know that. We don't see practices. So.
All right. So
Not that in depth, yeah.
So coming out of the bye week, if we're going back a year ago, just using that as an example, not saying that this is the same situation, we saw a change at quarterback. I think I'm going to say this and then I'm going to be wrong, but I feel like it was around this time that we saw Troy Anderson get inserted into the starting lineup.
Yeah.
The reason why I bring this up, right, is that we're talking about adjustments and changes that can be made. But when you look at the team as constructed, Arthur Smith was very adamant, no coaching staff changes. I agree with that. I think this coaching staff is well constructed. The personalities and the chemistry on it, I think, are positive. I'm not sure that you could create a substantive change by making a staffing change. I don't think that's the issue. So could we see a personnel change at some level of the offense or defense? Do you think that when we talk about adjustments, which is a vague term, and look, they have every right to keep some of these things private. It makes sense to me. They're trying to create this competitive advantage. They don't want to tell the Saints everything that's going on with them. But are there – okay, so – what type of adjustments could we be talking about? Are we talking about schematic adjustments? Are we talking about personnel adjustments? Like, what type of tweaks can we see here as we progress through the bye week?
I think it's all on the table. I'm at the point kind of where I'm like, whatever you got to do to fix it, fix it. Like, if it's schematically, if it's personnel packages, if it's changing things up with your secondary. I mean, I just think I'm at the point where it's like, do what you got to do.
Yeah. Interesting. So I do think those things are on the table, but I kind of look at the starting 11s as currently constructed, and I still think that they're pretty good.
Well, I think, too, like if we're just talking about this defense, I think things change when you get D'Alford back. D'Alford has been really good for this defense. You get him back. You get David Onyemata back. Grady Jarrett obviously is done for the year, but if you can get those 2 pieces back, I think it kind of helps just in general for this defense. And offensively, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, you've got your starting 5 up front. You're using the best skill players, and you're using a lot of them. And look, it's so hard because you look at a defensive tackle and you don't see a bunch of numbers, and you don't necessarily think, even with the elites, that can pivot point a game here. And I'm not trying to over exaggerate it, but I've said this on Twitter a couple times. Grady Jarrett's presence in the locker room and on the field, whether it's how many blockers he's taking up, or him being, even if he's not a rah-rah guy, him just being a rallying point, cannot be underscored.
Right.
And I think that loss, while you have losses and injuries happen and they stink, I think that's one of those kind of low-key underrated things that without him is just different.
Yeah.
It's not it's not something that can't be overcome, and it's a next man up mentality, and the coaches will say that, and Grady Jarrett will say that too. But I think that that's one of those things where that part of it, 97 not being there, kind of can't be taken out of the equation, right? He just has such a broad impact that is hard to state.
I think I wrote this when it was when he went on IR, and it's like, this is the undisputed heart, soul, and leader of this team, not just this defensive unit, but this team. He is a staple and a centerfold of this organization, and to not have him on the field, I mean, we've seen it in the last few years, like what you're saying, how many blockers he's taking on, and the impact that playing alongside Grady Jarrett has on someone like David Onyemata. And just in the confines of this game on Sunday, the loss to the Cardinals, it's like, to not have both of them in the interior, it just completely changes the way I think you look at this defensive line. And that's not taking anything away from the other guys that are rotating in and out and moving Calais Campbell inside. That doesn't take away from any of that. It's just a fact.
Well, they gave up 2 rushing touchdowns in Sunday's game. They gave up 2 in the 9 prior to that.
Yeah, and there was some interior room to run. The Cardinals were pretty successful on the ground, and all those things I think are factors. And look, as we head into the bye week, the coaches, we're not allowed in those meetings, but the coaches are going to be honest and objective and try to figure out what's wrong and how to fix it. And I think that overall you've seen that that's been the tone of this podcast to this point, is that there is better there, but how can you extract it? So let's end it on a little bit of an uptick, right? The NFC South is still wide open.
Yeah.
As Arthur
Even
Smith
in talking
said,
about all of this, like the fact of the matter is the Falcons have 2 NFC South wins, and they kind of have everything ahead of them.
they have
after
everything
the bye.
ahead of them. So it's one of those things where got to fix it and got to fix it fast. The New Orleans Saints lost to the Minnesota Vikings in Week 10 as well.
They're 5-5 now.
So they're 5-5. Falcons and Bucks are 4-6.
Mm-hmm.
Panthers are struggling. But with those 3 teams packed together, it's still pretty tight. Now, I wrote in a column last night that the distance from first place doesn't matter as much as playing winning football, because you could be ahead one game, and if you play like they have over the last 3 weeks, it doesn't really matter. But the opportunity is there. They're not out of it. They're right in the thick of this thing. And even still, and we all know on paper it doesn't matter, but even still, I think the Falcons match up well with the Saints. I feel like they match up well with the Bucks, and they can compete with those teams on that level. Mm-hmm. So with all that said, right, and we've talked about the adjustments and everything being on the table, and I think that's why there's such a sense of urgency, right? Mm-hmm. Because they can still do it. There's 7 games left. 3 of the next 4, they do an NFC South tour. Mm-hmm. So they're going to get a chance. If they can take care of business in the division,
right,
then it's all still there.
Right, and that's the thing, is because of the way this division is right now and has been for the last few years, it's just a little bit chaotic, which means that anything can happen. And we've gotten to the point in the last few years where it's like we get to week 15, 16, and it's like we're still having these conversations as to who's going to be first place, and it's all about like different tiebreakers and who needs to beat who. And I feel like if the Falcons do what they're supposed to do, they save everybody a lot of trouble if they go and they beat these divisional opponents. And that's what you hope. You hope that for the Falcons' sake and for this team that they can turn it around, because they do have a chance. The way that this division is, you don't need 12 games to win the division. You don't need 11 games to win this division. Dare I say you don't need double-digit wins.
Right.
Like, you know, so
I think that's possible too.
I think it's very possible. So to leave you with a little bit of hope, like this thing isn't over yet, but they've got to turn it around. They've got to score more touchdowns. They've got to get in the end zone. They've got to stop giving up explosive plays. Like,
it can't just be potential.
Right.
Right. And I think that everybody in the locker room would say the same thing, because I feel like they know what they can be. And at times we've seen the type of quality that is available within the confines of this depth chart and the depth that they haven't had last year. The difference, I think, between the conversations had in previous seasons where they're still in it, but they're kind of like hanging on by a thread. And I think, but everybody kind of knew, all right, the depth isn't there because of all the cap constraints, and the talent level overall isn't there. I don't know about that this time. I think if 2 main things can happen, which haven't happened yet, but if 2 main things can happen, if they can be more efficient in the red zone and get more consistent quarterback play, and if it's so easy to say, right? It's like be consistent 40-yard pass, right? It's one of those things that if you can eliminate those, be the good run defense that they are, I think that they can figure it out.
And capitalize. I'll say this too: capitalize on turnovers.
Yeah, that's not something that's happened.
When your defense gives you the ball back as an offense, and you have good field position.
Didn't they get it at the 14?
Got it at the 14, had it at the 1 last week, got it at the 33, 34, also against
in enemy territory,
right?
Basically,
so these are turnovers that are giving the Falcons really, really good opportunities, and they're not capitalizing on these moments, and they have to.
Yeah. Field goals are not enough.
Well, I think Arthur Smith even said it after the game, after the loss in Arizona, where he was like, a lot of these games are 1-possession games. And he's right, they are, especially for this team. Terrin knows, she writes the post-game story at the buzzer. So
stress.
Right. So these are 1-possession games, but
So in those games,
you have to capitalize on those moments, and you can't have quarters where you have negative net yards. The Falcons had -2 net yards in the third quarter.
But 3 points.
Against the Cardinals. That can't happen.
Right. So I think it goes back to overarching thing is that consistency on both sides of the ball. So ultimately, if they can achieve that and get their explosive playmakers rolling on both sides of the ball, anything can happen. I think it's definitely possible, and I think that they believe that too. So when you go into this, you can really work and evaluate and be objective. I encourage Falcons fans to do the exact same thing about this team as they move forward through it. We have reached the end of our time here on Falcons Final Whistle presented by Zaxby's. We're going to obviously take the bye week off. I don't think any one of the three of us will be in the city of Atlanta this weekend. And ultimately, we will come back to you next week after a massive engagement with the New Orleans Saints in Week 12 at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Find a ticket. It's going to be awesome. For Scott, Tori, and Terrin, we will see you real soon. Bye.